Well, hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I want to talk about the recent comments made by our Defense Secretary, the one and only John Healey, and his recent press conference that he's had. So without further ado, let's get into it. Now, I've come across a post on X from Sky News. And it's the breaking news that the Defense Secretary John Healey has held a news conference. And essentially what his news conference was about is, I'll just read some of the captions here. To President Putin, I say, we see you, we see your activity over our cables and pipelines. You should know that any attempt to damage them will not be tolerated and will have serious consequences. John Healey says the UK has detected increased Russian activity in the Atlantic. Now, I'll tell you why I flagged this. I flagged this for one reason and one reason only. During his conference, John Healey has said that while, and I paraphrase here, but while the world was focused on Iran, Europe and the UK with its allies in Europe have been monitoring the Russian threat.
I'm revealing details of a recent military operation undertaken by Russia. And in doing so, I'm doing this to expose the continuing Russian activity that threatens us in the UK and to highlight our constant readiness to respond. In the last few weeks, while the eyes of many were trained on the Middle East, the UK, in partnership with Norway and other allies, have responded to increased Russian activity in the Atlantic north of the UK. This operation involved a Russian Akula-class attack submarine and a concurrent deployment of two specialist submarines from Gugi. That's Russia's main directorate for deep-sea research. And last November, I outlined how these Gugi units, including the spy ship Yantar, are vessels directed by President Putin to conduct hybrid warfare activities against the UK and our allies, specifically around critical undersea infrastructure. And for the first time today, we're releasing images of the Gugi base and of these vessels. They're designed to survey underwater infrastructure during peacetime and sabotage it in conflict. In response to the Russian submarines, I can confirm that I deployed our armed forces to track and to deter any malign activity by these vessels. A Royal Navy warship and Royal Air Force P-8 aircraft, alongside allies, ensured that the Russian submarines were monitored 24/7. The Akula submarine subsequently retreated home, having been closely tracked throughout, and we continued to monitor the two Gugi submarines in and around wider UK waters. Our armed forces left them in no doubt that they were being monitored, that their movements were not covert, as President Putin planned, and that their attempted secret operation had been exposed. Those Gugi submarines have now left UK waters and headed back north. And this operation, which lasted more than a month, has now concluded. Our aircraft flew over 450 hours. Our frigate covered several thousand nautical miles, and 500 British personnel were involved in the response. And I'm making this statement to call out this Russian activity. And to President Putin, I say, we see you, we see your activity over our cables and our pipelines, and you should know that any attempt to damage them will not be tolerated and will have serious consequences.
You know why this press conference is important? This press conference is important because while there was a war going on in Iran, and while the United States had categorically asked the Europeans and the UK for assistance. Now again, what you think of it is immaterial. You have an ally that has asked you for assistance. We, together with the Europeans, denied any assistance to the Americans. The Americans are now starting to filter out the Falklands War, the war in Ukraine, the Second World War, everything that the Americans have done for Europe and the United Kingdom, they're now laying it down on the table. And they're saying, we didn't have to be involved in the Falklands War. It had nothing to do with us. It cost us a lot. It was a Herculean task on our end, but we stood by you. And when we needed you in our hour of need, you were not there. Now, you've got a ceasefire that has been achieved in Iran. Again, I don't believe it's going to hold for very long, but that's immaterial. You know, both sides are claiming victory here. And again, the victory is immaterial. It's the narrative that is put forth. The United Kingdom and the Europeans have suddenly realized, hey, our behavior has now left us out of the limelight. No European power has been involved in the negotiation. NATO-wise, you've got Turkey, but the Turks are neither within Europe nor without, because depending on the morning that Erdogan wakes up, he decides whether he's European or whether he's Turkish. It's at a point where the Europeans have now become irrelevant, but not irrelevant by somebody else making them irrelevant by them doing it to themselves. You recall Kaya Kallas? Europe has no appetite. This is not our war. We want to have nothing to do with it. You recall Macron in Trump's speech where he mocked Macron about being slapped and punched by his wife, and then about where he says Macron said to him, "Oh Donald, don't worry, we cannot do that, we cannot help you, but we will help you when the war is over or when the war is won." And he said, but and I'm paraphrasing here, he said, but I don't need you then. My point is, we have done this to ourselves. Now Starmer flying over to the Gulf, talking about we have achieved the ceasefire. Mate, there's no we. You did absolutely nothing. You deserve to be relegated to some corner of the galaxy where nobody knows about you and nobody even cares. This is a man that has got no spine. No spine, no decency, no pride, no sense of British pride. That he's made himself and his country look like a laughingstock on the world stage, yet he still goes. This is how thick-skinned he is, to try and make himself relevant. And he's now doubled down by asking this other idiot Healey to come out. And now again, the Russian threat. This is exactly like when Donald Trump was standing for his second term of elections. Do you recall the Russian threat? Do you recall the 52 ex-CIA and all these intelligence officers coming out and on under oath testifying that the Russians are involved, only to be proven? Tulsi Gabbard released the information. There was no Russian threat, no collusion, no threat to the election by the Russians. Because they always have this default boogeyman to go back to. They've messed up. They've alienated an ally. And now to try and save face and make it look like they've been doing something good, rather than sitting around twiddling their thumbs and toes, they want to say that while Iran was going on, we were busy policing the waters from the Russian threat. Mate, the Russians don't care about you. You don't need the Russians to destabilize the United Kingdom. I keep saying that. You do not need the Russians to destabilize the United Kingdom. Putin would be an even bigger idiot than you if he tried to destabilize the United Kingdom. He doesn't need that. You're doing a perfectly good job of that on your own. You are the best thing that could have happened to Vladimir Putin. Because you and your other European morons have now destabilized your own country, your own countries from within. You don't need a Russian threat. You've already embraced the threat. You've allowed it in. You've welcomed it in. You've provided housing, finance. You've appeased the threat. And now, when the threat rears its ugly head, rather than saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake, let's see how we can sort it out. No, you light a fire somewhere else. You light a Russian fire. So that everybody looks at the Russians and blames the Russians while your country is descending into the shithole that it is because of all the unjust because of all the messed up policies you've been promulgating within the country. And then you get another moron in your cabinet to go out and talk about a Russian threat while Iran was happening. Mate, you worried about cables? You worried about cables when you couldn't have any oil and gas coming through? So while you worried about cables and data, your people were worried about food and food security. So you tell me, what's more important, worrying about your cables in the North Sea, which I suspect you're talking bullshit about, or worrying you have now been exposed, and rather than saying I'm sorry, you go and double down. You blame the Russians. This has to end. It has to end, because the British people are not stupid. They are seeing through your bullshit. This has to end now. You cannot tell me that while you were policing your bloody cables in the North Sea, you couldn't be bothered about your energy reliance that was being hit in the Strait of Hormuz. That should have been your priority. But no, you thought about appeasement there. And appeasement there has led you now to come out with all these stories about you, submarines, Russian submarines. Mate, yes, Russian submarines may pose a threat, but do they pose that threat that is imminent and now as the Strait of Hormuz posed? No, it didn't. Because that is what affected the people that put you into power. That is what affected them. The bread and butter, nuts and bolts issues that affected them was providing food, fuel for their families, getting to work, coming home and making sure their families are fed, all the while being able to afford to do it. You've now priced them out of the market. You've made life more miserable than you already did for your people. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, you've gone and done this. And then on top of that, you come out with the stories about policing cables. You're joking, man. You really are joking. Is it going to be an internet problem for the people that they're worried about? Or is it going to be a problem about putting food on the table because they can't afford it? Really, you people are sickening, man. You are so sickening, so out of touch with reality. I saw something the other day, and I tell you, I'm not a big fan of this person, this woman, this Green Party leader that's been sent into parliament. But there was something that she had said. I just read a headline. I don't know if it's true or not, but it just hit home, where she said, speaking to people in parliament, she had no idea how out of touch they were with what was actually happening in the country. And that is true. If that indeed is what she said, she is 100% correct. Because these people get ferried around in bulletproof vehicles. These people get security. These parliamentarians get paid for the bullshit job that they do. They get sent everywhere. Their housing is subsidized. Their food is subsidized. Everything for them is done. So they do look at the populace as an us and them situation. And until you do not have a politician that is from the populace, that understands what the day-to-day life of a common United Kingdom citizen goes through, you are not going to solve this problem. Yeah, you'll find Sadiq Khan and say that his father was a bus driver. Mate, this is a guy that has come. If indeed it is true, I don't know. All I know is the guy is as big a moron as Starmer. You have this thing where when somebody is born into abject and extreme poverty, one of two things can happen to them. They can come out with a deep sense of empathy for humanity, where they then devote their lives to trying to empower and better the lives of their fellow citizens. Or you have the converse, which happens. They become so distasteful of the surroundings that they've grown up in. They lack any sense of empathy and become so selfish and narcissistic that they want to go on and just accumulate and amass for themselves, irrespective of the cost on their own fellow people. And they actually despise where they've come from, who they are, their families, because they see it as a weakness. And I suspect that Sadiq Khan is one of those people. He'll sell out anything and anybody to get to where he needs to. And that is not the type of politician you want. Starmer is the same. And they fill our institutions with that same kind of filth and rot. You need people that empathize with the British people, not somebody that has just arrived because they are struggling in their country. You can help people when you yourself are okay. You cannot help people when you cannot even help your own people, when you cannot even help yourself. How does that make sense? So again, this story about Russian subs and that, while it may be true, it is far from what was important at the time when our energy infrastructure and our energy capabilities were being throttled at the Strait of Hormuz, and you did nothing, absolutely nothing, to solve it. You sat there and said, when the war is over, we will then intervene. That is not the way a diplomat and a statesman behaves. That is not the way you behave when it involves your country. You should have said, this is our red line. If you interfere with our energy, you have a problem with us. And this is what we're prepared to do, and this is what we are going to do. And you would have been well within your rights to do that. You would have been well within the ambit of international law to have done that. However, you decided to play footsie with the Iranians. You decided to appease. And now you realize that you've been shown for the dastardly person that you are and the dastardly administration that you are. So what do? Oh, the Russians were trying to cut our cables. We're giving them a message. Yeah? Is that message so important? Is it more important than the people in your country putting food on the table, being able to afford cheap energy? Because again, the Russians were prepared to supply you with that cheap energy. You weren't prepared to take it. Why? Because you want to fight Ukraine's battle. Ukraine didn't even have a battle until you made it one. You, together with Chrystia Freeland and the rest of these morons in the Biden administration and the administrations in the United States prior, that is what you all engineered in Ukraine. So I want to thank you for spending time with us. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And please remember to like, share, and subscribe and get our content out there. Forward it to as many people as you can, because we can get a dialogue going, and God willing, we can get a much more decent administration in. I don't care whether it's conservative, green, pink, blue, white, purple, Labour. It doesn't matter to me. What matters to me is that the interests and needs of the British people are first and foremost and upfront. And I'm not talking about people that just arrived here being put up in hotels, given 5-star treatment, allowed to abuse the system and still be. I'm talking about people that have built this country, the ethnic people of this country, and those that have come in and willingly contributed. I work with a lot of migrants. They work damn hard and they contribute to build because they want a better life. I'm not talking about those people that come in here and tell you that, oh, I don't like this and I don't like that, I should be having this and that. And it happens. It happens. So once again, thank you for spending time with us, and please remember to like, share, and subscribe, as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.